Good morning, Anna. Thank you for being with us today. We're very lucky today to have with us Miss Anna Joubin-Bret, who's one of the distinguished faculty in ICSID's Investor State Mediation Training Program. Thank you very much again for being here with us,
My pleasure.
sharing some of your vast experience. And I understand we're going to be talking about procedural considerations concerning early stages of investment mediation today. So, in your experience, Anna, are there particular aspects for states to consider when deciding to agree on investor-state mediation?
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Thank you for giving me the opportunity for this exchange, and also for giving me the opportunity to take part in this very interesting and timely initiative of organizing a course for investor-state mediators here at ICSID together with the Energy Charter Treaty. I think there are a number of aspects that are very specific for states to take into consideration. And the first one is really that mediation, unlike arbitration in investor-state disputes, is a voluntary process. And that is something that really needs to be taken on board. We call it a voluntary process, and I'd like to emphasize this process aspect very much, because I think it's important for government officials to understand that when engaging in a mediation, they are protected by a procedure, by a process that, although it's not like an arbitration, because there is much more party control and party direction and involvement in this process, it's still very much, it operates within a framework, and that, I think, is protective for government officials, that their responsibility and their decisions are taken into account within this framework, or are used within this framework. The other point I'd like to emphasize here is that to consider, to agree to a mediation, there's a lot of ingredients that need to be in place. And I think one of these ingredients is we're really getting there with treaty language. Treaty language, unlike the early treaties where you had room for amicable settlement, or room for what we call a cooling off period, where you could be basically sitting on your chair and not doing anything. The treaties are much more conducive now to reaching out to the other party and trying to settle the disputes, including through facilitated processes like mediation. If you look, for example, at the most recent treaty between Canada and the European Union, the CETA, it not only has mediation as a feature, a standalone feature in the investor-state dispute settlement section, but it also has a standalone annex which describes the rules that the parties have agreed upon to be used for a mediation process. And this, I think, is very, it's a strong support for states wanting to go into the investor-state mediation process, that they're not left completely on their own, without rules and without guidelines, without procedure, and they can really rely on what is there. Interestingly, there's also, in addition to this initiative of the ICSID Secretariat to organize this training course, there's also, for example, a guide for investment mediation that the Energy Charter Treaty Secretariat has put together, which walks the parties through the different stages of a mediation, explains how it's working, and basically guides the parties in their preparation and then in the conduct of a mediation. And maybe if I could add a last point that you were asking me about what should states consider. Um, what is important to consider and to prepare carefully is the state's delegation that will attend these mediation procedures and the mediation sessions. Um, Unlike in arbitration, where you will have counsel or you will have a state team, defense team that will be fronting and that will be defending the state in the arbitration, here it's much more of a collaborative process where the delegation is composed of different entities, sometimes even as far as communities, as far as um, a municipal government, province, different state entities that are all part or need to be part of this process, whether at the outset or then be brought into the process to make sure that it flows, and that it can lead to a result.
Thanks, Anna. Can you elaborate a little bit about the initial contacts among the parties, how they look, how are they structured?
Yes. Yes, so unlike in investment arbitration, where you receive a notice of intent or a notice of arbitration, you have to act on it, here you have different windows, first of all, for a mediation to start. You have the ideal time frame or the ideal window, which is before an arbitration is looming and when you can catch the dispute before it escalates into a legal dispute, which then in turn will crystallize around treaty violations. So there is really a window for mediation that should be actively pursued. There's another window, I think, during this cooling off or amicable settlement period where, although the time is short, usually it's 3 months or 6 months, but there still is the possibility to initiate a mediation that can then run parallel to the arbitration proceeding, or which can be interrupted but you can go back to at a later stage. And of course, what we understand is that there are discussions, settlements happening all through the course of an arbitration. There are statistics to that effect in the Secretariat. So really it really depends on the window that you will choose. But generally, what is important is that the parties going into a mediation commit to at least go to a certain stage before they decide that they will continue or they decide that they want to walk away because it's not going to be successful or not, it's not going to help them settle the dispute. And this is why in the IBA, Investor State Mediation Rules, there is an inbuilt mediation management conference. And this mediation management conference is really meant to put a number of key issues on the table, to have them discussed, to have them sorted out, and to give the comfort zone, to build a comfort zone around this mediation process. And there are many of these issues, an issue of language, the issue of venue, which is not unimportant when you think that a state delegation can sometimes consist of 20 people, 25 people. So this is not innocuous. You have the problem of confidentiality of the process itself, but transparency when it comes to the fact that a mediation is taking place. You have issues such as how are we going to communicate, what is the role of the mediator going to be, are we engaging on different aspects of the dispute, and how are we going to reach a settled agreement, how are we going to for example, what is the approval that is needed on the part of the state and of the investor on a final settlement? There is definitely an approval process within the state, And that needs to be spelled out or clearly understood at the outset so that you don't run into surprises when you have a settlement there and suddenly you're told, oh, but we need to run it by the president or by the prime minister. So all of this needs to be discussed at the outset, and it usually creates also the trust in the mediator's ability and in the goodwill of the other party, which is essential for a mediation process to go ahead. What I'd like to add maybe in this particular context is that I see a very important role for the lawyers, for the legal advisors of both parties to come with their expertise and to again provide a comfort zone around their clients, that whatever they are doing is not going to be detrimental to subsequent arbitration, for example. Putting safeguards in place on documents, for example, or on positions. And I think there is a very conducive role on the part of counsel. And I think that, again, when I see, looking at the participation in this course here these days in DC, you can see that there's really an interest on the part also of counsel to know more how it works. And lastly, I think there is a key role for institutions, for arbitration institutions, to be played to facilitate, again, as much as possible, this process, which needs communication between the parties, but also needs, for example, proposing mediators. You don't necessarily know investment mediators in that you don't have investment mediators in all the countries. So that's a role for institutions, the facilities, venue, payment of costs. All of this is, in my view, a strong support that institutions can lend to an investor-state mediation. And again, this probably helps in the initial contacts. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you.